The driver reiterates his statement calmly, but the officer remains dismissive, unwilling to take him seriously. Vehicles stream past on the highway shoulder as this indignity unfolds. What the officer fails to grasp is that a verification call has already been initiated, and the Internal Affairs Department is mere seconds away from silencing his taunts. Before we proceed, kindly share your geographic location in the comments below, and ensure you subscribe, as tomorrow's narrative is one you absolutely will not want to miss. Sergeant Thomas Grant, the officer in question, had been a member of the police force for more than 10 years. Known among his peers for his short temper and gruff demeanor, he had a history of prejudging individuals based on their appearance. Officers within his precinct frequently exchanged apprehensive glances when he was engaged in a call, wary of how he might escalate seemingly routine situations. On this particular afternoon, his inherent bias was immediately evident. His voice carried a sneering undertone, and his posture was stiff as he approached the individual standing by the roadside. Every movement seemed designed to assert dominance, to establish authority before any factual information could be presented. Standing alongside him, Agent Marcus Hayes calmly adjusted his jacket. 34 years old, with extensive federal service experience, Marcus was no stranger to such encounters. Traffic stops were a commonplace occurrence. However, on this day, the officer's reaction suggested more than just a standard inquiry. It hinted at potential ridicule. Marcus kept his badge discreetly but deliberately in his pocket, prepared to present it at the appropriate juncture. His gaze, sharp and unwavering, met Grant's sneering presence without faltering. "Sir, I require your driver's license and vehicle registration," Grant commanded, his tone imbued with a false sense of authority. Marcus responded with measured composure. "I am Agent Marcus Hayes, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I'm currently on official duty." A laugh, sharp and derisive, erupted from the officer. "FBI? You? That's quite amusing. Truly hilarious." Marcus repeated himself calmly, maintaining his equilibrium even as the officer moved closer, encroaching on his personal space. The shoulder of the road transformed into an impromptu stage, with the rushing traffic serving as a blurred backdrop to Grant's derision, which occupied center stage. Pedestrians on the sidewalk cast curious or wary glances, but the officer's mockery persisted unabated. Grant's words were sharp, intended to belittle. "Agent, is it? Let me venture a guess. You discovered a badge in a cereal box this morning." His laughter echoed across the asphalt, conspicuous and unprofessional. It was an overt display of power, designed to undermine Marcus's credibility before anyone else had a chance to respond. Marcus, accustomed to such displays, remained tranquil. "Sir, I am requesting that you verify my identification. It is a legitimate claim." Grant's eyes narrowed, scrutinizing him as if he were a peculiar roadside spectacle. "Verification? You expect me to simply accept your word for it? I've encountered numerous buffoons who attempt this ruse. Not happening." The tension escalated with each passing second. The officer's history of dismissing black men in positions of authority had already established him as a figure of concern in the community. Colleagues had informally discussed past incidents where complaints were lodged but never formally pursued. This background subtly permeated the encounter, fostering an atmosphere of distrust and intimidation. Marcus glanced along the roadside, observing the passing vehicles and the distant hum of sirens, recognizing that patience was his most valuable asset. His badge, credentials, and training served as a protective shield against the ignorance before him. Yet Grant was not merely skeptical, he was overtly hostile. Every word and every chuckle was a deliberate attempt to humiliate. "You cannot be serious," Grant sneered, shaking his head. "Someone like you claiming to be federal? That's pure comedic gold." The body camera meticulously documented every flicker of Marcus's controlled frustration, every measured breath, and every deliberate utterance. To an observer, it might have appeared as a standard traffic stop, but the underlying tension was anything but ordinary. This was a test of professional conduct under duress, and Marcus was determined to pass without granting the officer the satisfaction of an emotional outburst. Even as Grant continued his verbal assault, Marcus was aware of something the officer was not. A verification was already in progress, Internal Affairs had been alerted the moment the call was received. A silent authority was making its way toward them. Grant's intended dominance through laughter was about to be confronted by the reality of accountability. As the initial phase of this roadside confrontation unfolded, Marcus's composure stood in stark contrast to the officer's arrogance. It was a demonstration of restraint and professionalism, a quiet yet potent assertion that true authority is not derived from prejudice, but confirmed by truth. Nevertheless, the situation remained unresolved. Grant's mockery, his sneers, his refusal to believe, all set the stage for a reckoning, one that would arise not from immediate retribution, but from the inevitable substantiation of facts. The air crackled with tension, much like static electricity. Each laugh and scornful remark only heightened the anticipation for what was to come. For the moment, the cameras continued to record, the traffic flowed, and a prejudiced officer reveled in his misplaced sense of superiority, oblivious to the fact that the system had already begun its response. The officer's laughter still echoed along the roadside, but Marcus Hayes remained unfazed. Verification had already commenced. Somewhere, someone was making a phone call, confirming the credentials that the officer so vehemently refused to acknowledge. The measured precision in Marcus's voice stood in sharp contrast to Sergeant Grant's escalating anger and disbelief. Grant leaned against his patrol vehicle, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips as if he controlled the entire situation. "I don't care who you claim to be, Agent. You expect me to take your word for it? That's not how things operate out here." His tone was sharp, dismissive, and permeated with prejudice. Every utterance carried the weight of past encounters, ingrained assumptions, and a deep-seated bias he was unwilling to re-examine. Marcus took a step forward, his hands open in a gesture intended to de-escalate. "Sir, I am requesting that you verify my credentials. This is not a matter of personal belief, but of procedural protocol. Internal Affairs is currently conducting its review." Grant interrupted him with another mocking laugh. "Internal Affairs, what are they going to do? Send you a certificate of participation? Do you believe that alters reality? Individuals like yourself are not afforded the benefit of the doubt in my world." The tension thickened. Cars sped by, their engines merging with the officer's laughter and Marcus's calm tone. Pedestrians glanced over, observing the exchange but unsure of how to react. Some slowed their pace, sensing the hostility emanating from the officer. Others simply continued on their way. Marcus's patience did not waver. Years of federal service had instilled in him the ability to manage confrontation with precision rather than emotion. Nevertheless, with each passing second Grant continued his taunts, the sense of injustice deepened. This was not merely about him. It was about the fundamental principle that a man's words and credentials should be respected, irrespective of his skin color. Grant leaned in closer, lowering his voice in a manner clearly intended to intimidate. "Do you genuinely believe that flashing a badge and spouting a few letters renders you immune to consequence? People like you do not get to operate under the illusion of invincibility. I have encountered many like you who believe themselves to be above the law." Marcus maintained eye contact with the officer, refusing to be provoked. "I am not above the law. I uphold it, but I also expect it to be applied equitably. At this moment, you're acting contrary to established procedure by dismissing me based on unfounded assumptions." The officer's jaw tightened, his smirk faltering for a fleeting instant. This subtle crack in his facade was not lost on anyone. He quickly masked it with another laugh, this one louder, artificially amplifying the tension. The body camera recorded every flicker of human emotion, the smugness, the irritation, the carefully controlled calm. Then, the radio in Grant's patrol car crackled. A brief interruption to the standoff. "Unit 47 acknowledge. Internal Affairs is requesting contact on line 1. Verification request received." Grant scoffed, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Yes, I'll attend to it." However, a subtle hint of unease now permeated his demeanor, just enough to indicate that the system was quietly moving in Marcus's favor. Marcus offered no response. He remained composed, allowing the officer to fume while he maintained his own equilibrium. The irony was not lost on him. Here was a man who presumed authority through intimidation, only to be subtly undermined by the very procedures he thought he commanded. Minutes felt like hours. Every sarcastic remark, every condescending glance now hung in the air, serving as an accusation awaiting confirmation. The roadside confrontation had evolved into a quiet stalemate between patience and arrogance. Marcus's composure served as a weapon in itself, starkly contrasting with Grant's unchecked ego. Finally, a notification chimed on Grant's car console. Internal Affairs confirmation incoming. His eyes flicked downward, then back to Marcus, a fleeting expression of disbelief crossing his face, though he quickly concealed it with a shrug and another laugh, unwilling to concede the possibility of error. Marcus understood that the truth was imminent. Internal Affairs was not merely a bureaucratic formality, it was the inevitable validation of what he had calmly articulated from the outset. The officer's mockery was a flimsy pretense, one that could not endure indefinitely, and just like that, the dynamic shifted. Even if Grant refused to acknowledge it, his laughter had lost much of its potency. The traffic continued to flow, pedestrians still cast glances, but now there was a subtle gravitas in the atmosphere, an anticipation that suggested the reckoning was drawing near. For Marcus Hayes, the lesson was clear. Patience, composure, and truth would always triumph over arrogance and prejudice. And for Grant, the very system he sought to diminish was closing in, quietly dismantling his sense of superiority with each passing moment. By this point, the laughter had subsided somewhat, replaced by a quiet tension that pervaded the shoulder of the busy thoroughfare. To an outside observer, it appeared to be nothing more than a routine traffic stop. However, what was unfolding was far from ordinary. This was not a standard encounter. It was a confrontation shaped by years of prejudice, unchecked authority, and a man's steadfast insistence on being recognized for his true identity. Agent Marcus Hayes had maintained his calm from the beginning, but this composure was deliberate. Years of federal service had taught him one paramount lesson: maintain control of your demeanor, and the truth will ultimately prevail. Behind him, the wind carried the low hum of passing vehicles, their engines blending into the ambient soundtrack of the moment. Every car horn, every tire rolling by, served as a counterpoint to the simmering tension between him and Sergeant Thomas Grant. Grant, standing rigidly beside his patrol car, still sported that arrogant smirk, though it was now tinged with a palpable unease. Something was transpiring behind the scenes, something he could not yet discern. Verification calls were being made. Phones were being answered. Internal Affairs had been alerted. Each second brought Marcus closer to vindication and diminished the power of Grant's mockery. "Are you serious, Agent?" Grant inquired, leaning in just enough to exert intimidation. "You expect me to believe this without concrete evidence? Do you imagine that merely displaying a badge makes it authentic? Individuals like yourself often believe the rules don't apply, but reality has a peculiar way of rectifying such misconceptions." Marcus remained steady, his voice calm and controlled. "Sir, the verification process is currently underway. Internal Affairs will confirm my credentials. This matter is not about personal conviction. It is about adhering to established procedure." The officer, accustomed to manipulating situations to his advantage, was now facing a significant challenge to his deeply ingrained assumptions. It wasn't merely the body camera meticulously recording every interaction. It was the quiet inevitability of accountability operating in the background. In terms of narrative structure, this is the juncture where unseen forces commence altering the storyline, transforming mockery into something far more precarious. Grant's smirk faltered slightly as his radio crackled once more. A voice, official and firm, instructed him to hold while the verification was being finalized. The officer's hand tapped impatiently against the patrol car, but he could no longer conceal the dawning realization that this stop was no longer under his command. For an individual whose authority was predicated on ego and prejudice, the very system he had disregarded was now closing in. Marcus adjusted his stance, leaning slightly towards the officer while maintaining a respectful distance. "You may continue to mock me," he stated, his voice steady. "However, the truth does not hinge on your approval. Internal Affairs will confirm it, and once that occurs, this conduct, your conduct, will be officially documented." And then it happened. The phone on Grant's console chimed, and a text message appeared. Verification completed. Marcus Hayes is unequivocally an FBI agent. Internal Affairs had confirmed it. In that instant, the officer's laughter, once so boisterous and persistent, seemed to shrink. He stared at the screen as if confronted by an impossibility. A cold realization began to spread across his face. He had been mistaken, and the evidence was irrefutable. This is where the narrative takes its unexpected turn. Grant, who had established his authority through intimidation and ridicule, found himself exposed, not in a private reprimand, but in the very arena where he had exercised his power, the roadside. Every passerby, every frame of the camera, every witness to the interaction now observed the reversal of the authority imbalance. The man he had mocked, the man he had refused to believe, was vindicated in real time. Marcus's voice broke the silence, calm but carrying undeniable weight. Internal Affairs has confirmed my credentials, Sergeant. You may either proceed professionally, or this entire interaction will be formally documented for review. The irony was palpable. The man who had attempted to belittle Marcus now had to confront the reality of documented truth. Every sneer, every dismissive remark, every mocking laugh was now part of an official record, preserved for scrutiny. The traffic continued to flow past, oblivious to the significance of what had just transpired. For the viewers, this moment is both gratifying and suspenseful. Gratifying because justice, though perhaps delayed, is clearly evident. Suspenseful because the repercussions for Grant are only just beginning. Internal Affairs would pursue the matter further, and Marcus's patience and professionalism had initiated a chain of events that could lead to significant consequences. However, the narrative does not conclude here. The twist lies not merely in Marcus's verification, but in the subtle shift of power, the quiet humiliation of a man who had believed himself to be untouchable. The laughter has dissipated, replaced by an unsettling tension, a moment of reckoning captured as it unfolded. As the body camera continued to record, it captured something more significant than a mere traffic stop. It depicted a clash between prejudice and professionalism, arrogance and truth. And for anyone observing, whether directly or through this account, it served as a clear illustration. Systems are in place to address misconduct, and patience, composure, and evidence-based authority can dismantle even the most deeply entrenched assumptions. In the ensuing moments, Marcus would continue to assert his authority, but the foundation for a more profound examination of the officer's actions had been laid. The officer's behavior, once tacitly accepted, would now face scrutiny extending far beyond the confines of that roadside. And for the viewers, this is where the gravity of the story truly resonates. It is a twist not of violence or spectacle, but of reality asserting itself, quietly, relentlessly, and undeniably. By this point, the roadside had assumed a peculiar stillness. Traffic continued its usual flow, unaware of the events that had just transpired. But for those observing the body camera footage, the tension was palpable. Sergeant Thomas Grant stood rigidly. The smirk that had characterized the encounter was gone, replaced by a thin facade of composure that barely concealed his frustration, embarrassment, and a nascent sense of fear. For Marcus Hayes, the moment was quiet, yet profoundly significant. He had maintained his calm, his professionalism, and his dignity, and now the confirmation of his authority permeated the air as an undeniable fact. But this was more than mere vindication. It was a turning point, a test of accountability that transcended a simple traffic stop. Documentary footage often captures subtle nuances that reveal the human element of events, the clenching of a jaw, the slight lowering of one's gaze, the brief pause before speaking. In this particular instance, Grant's body language conveyed the narrative more powerfully than any words could. "Internal Affairs has confirmed your credentials, Sergeant," Marcus stated, his voice even but carrying the weight of his authority. "This interaction will be documented. Any further deviation from established procedure will result in consequences." Grant's laughter had vanished, replaced by a heavy silence. His hands rested on the patrol car as if for support, but a tremor could be detected in his fingers. That tremor signified not just fear, but the dawning realization of accountability. A lifetime of unquestioned assumptions and carelessly wielded authority was colliding with reality. And reality, in this instance, was non-negotiable. The cameras did not deceive. Every gesture, every inflection, every mocking glance that had previously punctuated the stop was now preserved in digital format, ready for review, analysis, and scrutiny. And Marcus, standing resolute, represented more than just himself. He embodied the principle that professionalism, patience, and truth possess the power to dismantle arrogance. As the officer's demeanor underwent a transformation, so too did the narrative of the stop. What had begun as an act of ridicule had now become a study in human emotion. Shock, embarrassment, frustration, and the gradual, reluctant acknowledgement that power is never absolute. For the viewer, the scene was almost cinematic in its unadorned simplicity. There were no explosions or high-speed chases, only individuals confronting the ramifications of their own biases, raw and unfiltered. The subsequent hours were a blur of procedural follow-ups. Internal Affairs meticulously compiled reports documenting every facet of the stop, including every mocking remark and every act of disrespect. Statements were solicited from witnesses, fellow officers, and even nearby pedestrians who had observed the scene. Every detail, however minor, contributed to an accumulating body of evidence. And while Marcus Hayes remained composed, the tension behind the scenes steadily escalated, moving towards a far more consequential outcome. Soon thereafter, a lawsuit seeking $9 million was filed. This figure represented more than just a monetary sum. It was a definitive statement, a declaration that humiliation, discrimination, and the abuse of authority would not be tolerated. The lawsuit garnered national attention, drawing scrutiny not only to the officer, but also to the systems that had permitted such bias to persist. And for the first time, Grant was compelled to confront the full extent of his actions. Not merely the embarrassment he felt at the roadside, but the tangible public consequences that now followed him. What rendered this chapter of the story so compelling were the human emotions intricately interwoven with every procedural detail. Marcus experienced relief, undoubtedly, but also a sense of profound responsibility. This was not merely about a single traffic stop. It was about establishing a precedent, demonstrating that dignity and fairness cannot be disregarded. Grant's emotions ranged from anger and denial to a growing sense of fear and shame, coupled with an awareness that his reputation, once taken for granted, could unravel in an instant. The courtroom proceedings, when they eventually occurred, were fraught with tension. Testimonies meticulously detailed the stop, with every word analyzed and every gesture replayed. The footage from the body camera, once a tool for mockery, transformed into a potent instrument of truth. Marcus Hayes testified with unwavering calm and authority, recounting the incident factually and illustrating to the world that composure and integrity hold greater value than intimidation or prejudice. Grant, meanwhile, faced a reckoning that extended beyond legal implications, encompassing a moral confrontation. The evidence presented was incontrovertible, transforming the courtroom into a theater of reckoning. Yet even within the charged atmosphere of the legal proceedings, fleeting human moments illuminated why this narrative held such sway. Colleagues of Marcus offered silent affirmations, some lending a comforting touch or a knowing glance, acknowledging the fortitude required to maintain composure amidst derision. Grant's former adherents observed with astonishment, compelled to reconcile their esteem for authority with the stark reality of prejudice and haughtiness. Documentary narratives frequently spotlight these interpersonal reactions as they provide essential context, anchoring the account in genuine sentiment rather than abstract occurrences. Upon the announcement of the settlement, the sum of $9 million became a headline phenomenon. However, transcending the monetary figure, the true significance resided in the precedent established. The dignity of an individual, once challenged and belittled, had been rightfully upheld. Accountability, previously deferred, had finally been realized. For those observing, the sense of resolution stemmed not solely from the verdict. It derived from witnessing a saga of inequity, insolence, and scorn evolve into a testament of vindication, decorum, and repercussions. Even then, the narrative extended beyond simple right versus wrong. It explored the visceral experience of being disregarded, of facing ridicule, and subsequently, of having one's truth acknowledged. Profound human emotions were laid bare. The apprehension and degradation experienced during the stop, the suspense of awaiting confirmation, the profound satisfaction of exoneration, and even the subtle, enduring embarrassment of those who had misjudged Marcus Hayes. This multifaceted complexity renders narratives such as this exceptionally captivating, ensuring viewer engagement from inception to conclusion. By the narrative's close, the perspective had undergone a complete transformation. The jeers had ceased. The roadside, formerly a stage for mockery, had become an emblem of fortitude. The individual who had been derided had not only defended his integrity, but had also served as a potent reminder that professionalism, veracity, and calm authority possess greater potency than conceit or bias ever could. Ultimately, the account of that traffic encounter transcends a mere altercation. It delves into the spectrum of human sentiments that shape our reactions. Fear, arrogance, forbearance, pride, and vindication. It underscores the subtle efficacy of truth, the assured arrival of accountability, and the quiet resilience necessary to preserve equanimity when confronted with scorn. For audiences, this confluence of suspense, emotion, and the unexpected turn of events, culminating in the officer's downfall and the man's vindication, solidifies this story's indelible impact. Should you believe that the narrative of patience, truth, and justice holds the power to effect profound change, we encourage you to subscribe and follow for further compelling accounts where reality ultimately triumphs over arrogance.